ordering him off her viraga. Tossing the coffee and the buttered bhagya after him, she shouted, "I don't give a hunkara for you and your connections." So saying, she closed the door, and that was the end of that romance. And I lost track of Argabanki, but she lives on eternally. Now, I apologize for the wonkiness of this paper, but I'll try to make it interesting. Some of you received translations either earlier today or a couple of weeks ago that we've been laboring on here on Tuesday afternoons. And it's not necessary that you have one, but you can look along and look on. And we're going to be focusing in the beginning on Sāṃkhya Kārikā verses 25 through 32, more or less. And we're going to be focusing on the function of the fluctuations, the vṛittis in the world. We just saw a beautiful diagram of how this whole thing works. And we'll be examining the argument presented by Īśvara that the world is construed according to the constitution of one's own particular set of Guṇas. Okay, so through those last papers, I was just like, where's the Guṇas? Where's the Guṇas? So I'm glad that we aren't repeating one another. A suggestion will be made that the repeated use of the number 3 in these verses, 25 to 32, can be seen as a reference to the Guṇas, not to the threefold organ as defined later in the text, in 33. The number 3 figures prominently in the Sāṃkhya Kārikā, and I love what Jeff did. I, and myself, and my circumstance. Okay? More than just serving as a descriptive number, it carries a code-like message that signals 3 simultaneous core philosophical aspects. In the beginning of the text, the author signals that the key to freedom is a threefold process that involves arriving at the discernment of the distinction between the manifest, the unmanifest, and the knower. The vyakta, the avyakta, and the jnana. Kārikā 2. The text goes on to delineate 3 means of knowledge. That which is apparent, inferred, or declared authoritatively. And then it goes on, I think most importantly and insistently, to state that 3 Guṇas create the manifest realm. They are first mentioned in Sāṃkhya Kārikā 11 and are further described in 18 additional verses. So, Teen Guṇas gets a lot of verses. 12 through 14, 16, 18 through 20, 23, 25, 27, 29, 30, 33, 36, 46, 48, 54, 60. Okay? Height, or hut, or whatever you say, but lots of numbers of Guṇas. Their centrality cannot be overemphasized. This paper will focus in on one instance where the commentator Gaudapada overlooks a key reference to the Guṇas, and hence has influenced successive commentators, including Dr. Larson and Dr. Burley here, and I'm going to cite their dueling footnotes. And this detracts attention away from their determinative power. This paper will also suggest that in addition to the Guṇas, insufficient focus has been placed against the bhavas, the topic of no less than 13 verses, 23, 43 to 51, 63 to 65, and 67. As argued in chapter 15 of my book, Yoga and the Luminous, a commentator can miss the flow of a text's intent. And I, in that book, talk about 4 instances in the Yoga Sutra where Vyasa goes off on a tangent. The length of a comment can interrupt the argument being pursued in prior and subsequent passages. A commentary is generally read and not recited. And then I'm quoting myself here. The memory is not engaged in commentary to the extent as when reciting the text. And insights derived from hearing echoes within the recited text cannot be gleaned if you're all caught up in the commentary. In nearly all cases, the commentary is several times longer than the sutra itself, and by the time one reads through it, the continuity or flow from one sutra to the next is lost. The commentarial tradition focuses primarily on sutras in isolation from one another. Now, in a close reading of the Sāṃkhya Kārikā over the course of more than a year, one, and I have to say it's only one so far, such instance surfaced, where Gaudapada, the primary commentator upon the text, seemingly misinterpreted the number 3 in such a way that serves to de-emphasize the constitutive role of the Guṇas. This paper will discuss not only this occurrence, but also how it may distract from the emotional and constitutive role of the bhavas, which, despite their significant presence, as I just indicated, tend to be overlooked by many interpreters. Okay, as noted above, the discussion of the Guṇas begins with verse 11 and proceeds through verse 20. And I'm going to just read a few highlights from those. An object is discerned due to the 3 Guṇas. Okay, this move from avyakta into vyakta, from that unmanifest into the manifest, takes place as the Guṇas perform. In regard to the Guṇas, their nature is, and I'd like to get alliterative here, delight, disgust, and despair. Their purpose is luminosity, activity, and restraint. Their fluctuations combine so one overpowers the others. Your sattvika, so your rajas and tamas are tamped down. Your tamas, so your sattva and rajas are tamped down. Sattva is light and luminous. Raja stimulates and moves. Tamas is heavy and concealing. The humble jumble of non-discernment, okay, why we just sort of stumble around in a state of confusion, arises from the 3 Guṇas. The absence of that results in the contrary, which is consciousness. The material cause can be found in the nature of the Guṇas. And then this is all to establish, and there's a whole philosophical argument establishing the Prakriti and the Purusha, though neither can be seen. And this is a proof for the existence of Prakriti, is that she operates through the Guṇas, and we see the effects of the Guṇas in the realm of experience. And then it goes on with more detail, why Prakriti exists, why Purusha exists, and I like this one in particular, is it is hence established that the Purusha is the opposite of the 3 Guṇas. It is the witness. It is solitary, kaivalyam, neutral, madhyastha. It is the seer. It does nothing. Furthermore, due to, and Jeff, we actually borrowed your word compresence, because you were there, right? We will certainly footnote it, probably, if it remains, but it's still in flow. Further, due to compresence, the 2 of them together, Purusha and Prakriti together, the unconscious appears as if marked by consciousness. Because of the fluctuations of the Guṇas, the indifferent one appears as if active. These verses assert the primacy of the Guṇas. They characterize all aspects of the movement from the unmanifest to the manifest. The Guṇas do. The Guṇas bring into specificity the existence of the material world, Prakriti. They stand apart from Purusha. When their operations cease, then Purusha emerges. They give rise to and define the humble jungle of non-discernment. Oh, your name does come up here. The next verse, 21, describes the process of Samyoga. And we heard Samyoga showing up with the buttered bagel, right? He always wants people to stay engaged, and he's also a philanderer, okay? So I think that all of us have suffered from wandering mind, and that's Samyoga. Okay, so the next verse describes the practice of Samyoga, which Jeff Ashton skillfully translates as calm presence. Samyoga allows the dance between action and the witness to unfold, providing experience, back to that word, or life, looking in this direction, and freedom. The following verses itemize the specific ways in which the gunas congeal into other tattvas, cascading, and that beautiful chart showed it, from the buddhi, the mahat, into ego, ahamkara, mind, manas, the 5 sense organs, the 5 action organs, the 5 rudiments, and this is again one of our contributions in terms of tanmatra. Subtle elements just seemed a little bit too abstractive, so we came up with rudiments to complement elements. I don't know if we'll stick with it. But then out of the 5 rudiments comes the elements. So verse 23 introduces the bhavas. Okay, this is early in the text, to be explained in fuller detail much later in the text. And both this verse, 23, and 25 and 27 emphasize the gunas. From the energization of the ego arises the illuminating Sāṃkhya 11, the mind and the 10 organs, and the heavier tamasika elements, rudimentary and gross. Both are suffused with tejas, rajasika. The sense organs are the eyes, ears, nose, taste buds, and skin. The action organs are speech, hands, feet, anus, and genitals. The mind is of the nature of both the sense organs and the action organs, and the organs follow its intention, the intention of the mind. Now this is critical. From the distinctions of its constitutive gunas, the various aspects of the external world arise correspondingly. And one of the examples I like to use is when you acquire a new automobile and you're out on the freeway, your eye goes to that same automobile, which was always there anyway, but all of a sudden the landing of your prapancha, the landing of your senses, will be determined by the fact that your ahamkara is in possession of that particular seemingly identical set of gunas in the form of an automobile. Now this latter part of verse 27 requires special attention. So it's guna parinamam, avisheshan, nanatvam, bhakya, vedascha. And this translates, every manifest thing within the world owes its existence to its constitutive gunas. So I'm doing parinama, what a tough word, but there I was doing it as constitutive. Right? Usually I don't translate it, but important. (28) states that every vritti, every fluctuation, every moment of occurrence, every event, we can use a lot of different phenomenological types of language, every life moment, going over to Jeff here, generates from this process. Without constitutive gunas, there can be no experience. And then, this is important, without experience, I love it, we got life, we have experience, and they're interchangeable here. Without experience, there can be no freedom. Without life, there can be no freedom. Despite, and here I'm getting wonky, despite the obvious emphasis that Īśvarakṛṣṇa places on the power of the gunas and the shaping of reality, and despite the usage in 7 prior verses of the number 3, either tri or triya, in clear reference to the 3 gunas in the midst of 6 other verses that describe the gunas, Gaudapada, makes an assertion in his commentary even before he quotes the verse, and this is verse 29, that a new topic is being introduced. That topic doesn't get introduced until 33. This assertion, which I will rebut, muddies the meaning of that verse of 29. At stake here is the word trayasya in verse 29. Grammatically, it indicates of the three. Because the 13 antecedent verses that use or refer to the number 3 involve the three gunas, it makes sense that the reference to 3 in verse 29 indicates the constitutive gunas. Hence, a different translation. And Anna was a little bit allergic to this translation, but we'll work through this. Okay? So a fluctuation of vritti has 3 characteristics, gunas. None is held in common. We'll come back to that. And then it goes on to talk about the 5 winds. So it's putting the gunas right at the level of what we see in the Upanishads, which says, what is common to all things, and that is the breath. It says the 5 winds expressed through the breath form a fluctuation that is common in every operation. So everywhere else there's a specificity, breath underlies it all. In addition to reinforcing the primacy of the gunas, this verse also contrasts the changing and distinct nature of specific fluctuations of vṛttis generated by the gunas with the omnipresence of the 5 breaths, or pranas. However, this verse does not in any way indicate the meaning given to the verse by Gaudapada. Gaudapada opens his commentary with Aduna, Buddhyahamkara Manasam Uchite, which translates as, now the conversation turns to buddhi, ego, and mind. However, this threefold designation, which introduces an entirely new topic, does not appear until verse 33. Now, other translators, and I really saw this as like, okay, I'm barking up the right tree. Okay, other translators have grappled with understanding verses 29 and 30 because of Gaudapada's assertion. Larson states, following Gaudapada, that the 3 refers to buddhi, the ahamkara, but not quite following Gaudapada and the senses. While Burley, in his footnote, rebuts him, stating that the 3 refers to buddhi, ahamkara, and manas. Although these 3 inner organs of buddhi, ahamkara, and manas emerge later in the conversation as important, both in verse 29 and the 2 following verses, the emphasis seems to still reside in documenting and asserting the role of the gunas. So number 30, a fluctuation, it is said, arises in steps and simultaneously due to 4 functions of buddhi, ahamkara, manas, and an indriya. Furthermore, it can be seen that every action has an unseen precedent governed by the 3 gunas. And that later part gets lost because the Gaudapada doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. What does make sense is that he's saying that there's these 4 factors in an experience. Here, authentically, I think, alluding to the inner organ plus a sense contact. But when he is talking about the 3, I think that he's talking to that underlying substrate of each individual constitution formulated by the presence of varying degrees of the gunas. At stake here is laying out the premises for the relationship between the experience of activity through a fluctuation in service of the silent and active witness. And there's a little bit of a crescendo here. Verse 31 is quite beautiful. Each fluctuation arises due to its mutuality of cause and resulting condition. And this is going, I think, a little bit to Al saying, isn't this really Buddhism? And yeah, a little bit. But then it goes on, and it says, and this is not really Buddhism, each occurrence is created for nothing other than for the purpose of Purusha. Īśvarakṛṣṇa continues this reasoning in the following verse, again indicating the suffusion of the threefold process in every occurrence, every event. Occurrences happen through a 13-fold process resulting in holding, sustaining, and revealing. The result of this is tenfold, allowing all that is to be beheld, sustained, and revealed. And a delightful play on words involving assonance and alliteration in Sanskrit. The author invokes the word aharana for holding, which is tamish, you have a real object. Dharana for sustaining, rajas. And prakasha for illuminating, sattva. All activities manifest through the gunas. Two more nearby verses emphasize the importance of the gunas in determining the tenor and tone of experience and of life. Verse 33 fully and unambiguously introduces the threefold organ. It also introduces a statement that alludes to the importance of gunas. Now, I'm going to do a little turn here that I haven't seen elsewhere, and I'd have to develop the argument, but perhaps the inner organ itself reflects the three gunas. Buddhi occupying a space of sattva, ahamkara, the movement of rajas, and manas, which lands through the senses into the realm of the material, tamas. And this is the verse. And his preface to 29 should be the preface for 30, and the commentary as well. The inner occurrence is threefold, buddhi, ahamkara, manas. The external is tenfold, involving sense and action organs. The context for experiencing an object is predicated by the three, and I would hazard that this refers to the three gunas. The external, and here we get into time, the external always exists in the present, table, now. The internal occurrence, or the karanam, resides in all three times. So with the manas, with the ahamkara, with the buddhi, you can have memory and you can have future speculation. The objective world becomes construed through the threefold nature of the gunas and the antahkarana, with the gunas remain constitutive. Verse 36 emphasizes that all experience is shaped by the gunas. These experiences, like a lamp, are distinct one from another, determined by the gunas. They are brought to light in the buddhi. Again, buddhi, sattva, light, utterly for the purpose of vrūṣa. The gunas provide specificity for experience, guna vishesha. This verse underscores the purpose of all experience to be witnessed by vrūṣa. Okay, I get a little bit more time. So there's two other thoughts that I'm developing, and I'll more or less just summarize these. And one of the words that has troubled me for 40 years now is this word linga. And I remember upstairs here when there used to be classrooms, and it was my first, maybe second year of teaching. And I explained about Shiva lingams. And one of my students from India was absolutely horrified. I said, no, it's merely a symbol for Shiva. So, linga, it's a controversial word. And for those of you who may not know what I'm talking to, I think you all do here now. I think all the undergraduates have gone, but it refers to the linga or the phallus. And Larson wants to call the linga a proto-person comprising psychological characteristics. And Burley, again, the sort of the smackdown between the realist and the materialist, but the more experiential interpretation says that linga may be seen as a fluctuating experiential content of any individual conscious subject. And that seems really optimistic, and it seems to be pointing, I think, to the ultimate soteriology of Naham, Nasmi, Name, appearing later. And yeah, it's true. And again, recognizing Al here, this is the Buddhistic formula, which is common both to the Pali Canon and the Sāṃkhya Kārikā. But I also want to suggest that it mirrors and echoes the Upanishadic adage, neti neti, that it's a via negativa, it's by taking stuff away that we arrive at the purity of emptiness, that we arrive at the purity of consciousness. In the algebra of Sāṃkhya, and here I'm appreciating Anna's paper, we have to remember that that move that wants to bring us toward the freedom side is maybe precipitous, that in the algebra of Sāṃkhya, equal time is given, or seemingly so, to both Purusha and Prakriti. And Anna's paper, I thought, really demonstrated why. So let me go on with the term linga. To call it a mark, or a characteristic, or a sign, while technically correct and reflects its usage in logic, fails to capture the emotionality wrapped up in the word linga. Similarly, experiential content, Nick's chosen term, borders, on the clinical and analytical without conveying enough texture and flavor. However, the text itself uses the term linga, both in its technological application, as found in logic at the beginning when laying out the premises for the Sāṃkhya argument, proclaiming that inference is threefold: from a clear mark, tal langa, that mark, that's a table; from a prior mark, linga purvakam, how do I know this is a table? Because I learned when I was a little kid what a table is; and from reliable authority. So yeah, mark really works in Sāṃkhya Kārikā 5. But later uses of the term lend themselves to a more psychological rendering, and the one that we happened upon and stuck with, thanks to Ralph and Jensen. They are the word police, and we're trying to find a way to do this Tibetan style, and I'm already saying it's really hard, but in Tibet, the king sort of said, you either use the same word all the time from Tibetan, or if it doesn't exist, you have to make up a word and use that same word all the time. So when I had my translation training, we were reading Tibetan and Sanskrit simultaneously and learning from the Tibetans how to improve on Sanskrit, because they had to stake a claim grammatically and in terms of meaning. So in verse 10, linga is one of 9 qualities used to describe manifest reality. And what we did with verse 9 was to say that manifest reality is itself marked with personality. A little bit of license taken, but what Nick did was he used the word cipher, and I just thought this was a little bit more poetic. Now, another usage of the term can be found in the description of the confusion of property for Purusha through the process of what Jeff Ashton calls compresence or samyoga. Therefore, due to compresence, the unconscious personality appears as if it were conscious. Because of the fluctuations of the Guṇas, the indifferent one appears as if active. So there we're taking linga and associating it with the unconscious personality that stays in the realm of suffering. Okay, so I just really want to end here to leave a couple of moments for questions. But I'm going to read where, to me, it really becomes psychologically interesting. Here are the verses on personality or linga. The personality, which is cloaked with the bhavas, has already arisen but is not yet empowered. It endures within the mahat to the edge of the subtle. Because it has not experienced enjoyment, it transmigrates. And this is why at the Hindu funeral, the eldest son takes the iron bar and cracks open the skull, because the materiality of that linga, which is laden with samskaras and vasanas, needs to be released to fly up, to join with the rain clouds, and then re-enter the cycle of life. But it's because the desires still linger. Now this one. Just as art requires color, just as without pillars there can be no shadow, similarly, the personality cannot exist without the specifics of the bhavas. The personality performs like an actor due to its connection with the allurement of Prakriti. This is the cause of human exertion, yearning for both the secular, nimitta, vyakta Prakriti, and the transcendent, naimittika, freedom, purusha. Without the bhavas, there is no personality. Now here's where we get one of those great Sāṃkhya puzzles. Without the bhavas, there is no personality. Through the personality, the bhavas can be quelled. Therefore, the resultant creative world, sarga, emerges in a twofold manner. I love the ambiguity, and I'm rethinking this. I used to think it was subtle and gross, but now I'm thinking from honest paper, it really is a mutuality, a simultaneity of this relationship with the touch of one to the other. And then I'll just say that when we were doing this back in the 70s, and we encountered the 8, we said, oh, we can handle the 8. And Dr. Upendra, who founded the Yoga Institute's son, Jaidev, actually wrote his doctoral dissertation about the centrality of the bhavas in Sāṃkhya. And that dissertation influenced my professors who had trained in India, so that even he took the easy route of mapping out the 8. And the 8 are syzygetic, which means you only have to learn 4. And there's one of them that sets you free, which means you remember that one always, so you only have to remember 3. So this is really elementary. But jnana sets you free. Īśvarya gives you power. Viraga allows you to gain a little bit of distance. And dharma keeps you on the right track. And that becomes instrumental in terms of providing a corrective to this notion that there is no marga within Sāṃkhya other than jnana, because certainly positivity is accorded to those other 3 as well. And then in a handout that some of you have, we also puzzled over many weeks how to figure out the 50-fold bhavas. And they are a complex mixture of contentments and being thwarted. And they echo, as some of our students are working on, what we see in the Abhidharma of Buddhism, a very concerted attention given to mental states, as well as to the list of 100, and no one's writing on this year, maybe in years to come, with 148 properties that are delineated in the Jain Grunta material, all to say that I agree, it's all about experience, it's all about life, and at core, our mental states manifest our relationship with the world through these three modalities of tamas, rajas, and sattva. Okay, thank you. So I have to field my own questions. Yes, Susan.
So, Christy, thank you for your talk. All of the talks have been so great today. So you used the word life and experience almost interchangeably, maybe not on purpose. So it started to make me think that, you know, Jeff used life and I used his experience. Can one exist without the other? Can life exist without experience? Can experience exist without life? So maybe they're not necessarily synonyms so much as causative or dependent or codependent, if you will. I don't know. I just, as you were saying that several times, it started to occur to me that, maybe they're...
Okay, theologically, there's a little bit of a sticking point. There's a theologian called Gabriel Marcel who lived in early 20th century France. And he articulated a whole theology based on experience that was taken up by women's religious orders. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in the middle of a smackdown between the priests and the nuns. Because the nuns really embrace the language of experience. And the priests tend to loathe it because they think it becomes egotistic and self-referential. So talk about gender, I just did it, I'm guilty of it, but nonetheless, I have, with rapt attention, really noted that experience, and you retrieved experience from two different philosophers, that it's a word with a history, and we need to recognize that.
But couldn't the same be said for life? Life is a word with a history too. Like, life cannot exist without experience, even if we're not. Well, I guess it would require, like if we were breathing, we're having an experience.
Yeah, well, I think life, to sort of veer over to Merleau-Ponty, is a slightly fleshier word than experience, which sounds very sort of Greek and analytical. So I think we could also go like Greek origins, Germanic origins, earthy language, abstract language. Yeah, Lydia.
It does raise a question for me about the experience of death, cracking the skull.
Yeah.
So how does Sāṃkhya treat passing over?
Yeah, this is one of those really interesting, by this time it was so widely accepted they didn't even need to talk about it, but they do talk about it. And they do explicitly in the Sāṃkhya Kārikā say that some things carry over through the subtle body from one lifetime into another.
So then where does it dwell in Mula property?
Okay, if we do the biological Upanishad way, it's in the food that we eat, and that food, Adam Brahman, that food is God, and that food is constituted of the material that's come from those bodies that have been cremated and joined with the rain, and then rise up in plants, and then become ingested, and the coding for all of that causes you to be who you are. I sort of love that vision because then the personal narrative becomes impossible to track and it's not really that important. From a Buddhist perspective, with the boots that, the Bardo total, 49 days, the spirit rises, it retains its appetite, so it likes to check out all the buffets in Las Vegas, and then it really discovers it can go into anybody's bedroom it wants, and who doesn't want to be a voyeur, right? We heard about that gaze. And then it sort of ends up, I don't know how long you felt that night when your son was conceived, right? So anyway, that's their narrative. And there's various other mechanics of this, but Sāṃkhya remains agnostic. The Jains say that actually sometime in the last third of your life, you do something that will completely predetermine your next life, and then you just immediately go into the womb without the 49-day interim. So lots of different stories about the technology of it, but Sāṃkhya remains agnostic on how it happens, but states that it does happen.
But it's still an experience of the unmanifest.
To die. Maybe, although I'm not so sure.
Oh, well.
Because some people die and their fear, their feeling of isolation, their immense emotionality, their lack of peace is at the root of kama, is at the root of that yearning that has, as the Kārikā said, they didn't figure it out, so they're going to carry it over to the next birth. Yeah. And my own teacher from India would say, for those who do not die in peace, they die a deathless death. Yeah.
Does that bear upon the viability of personality as a translation or as a rendering of linga? Because it's the Sāṃkhya view, is it not, that it's the linga that transmigrates
Yes.
or is reborn? Now, in many conceptions of rebirth, one wouldn't say that it's the personality that is reborn, because the personality differs from one life to another, but there's something underlying it, some kind of substrate. So I wondered whether it bears upon that translation.
Yeah, that's a good considered reason to rethink that translation. But to the extent that samskara vasana operate as formative to one's personality, the person, of course, will occupy a different body. But if we go to the empirical research of Ian Stevenson and his tracking of young children who have past life memories, they do seem to inform their predilections and so on. So maybe personality could work.
I was thinking maybe just personhood rather than personality. This is what makes you a person.
Yeah. I like the texture of personality. Characters, you know. Yeah, exactly.
Early in your paper, you talked about how the bhavas were overlooked in a lot of commentary literature.
Yeah.
Can you comment on why the Sāṃkhya Kārikā has been so misread, particularly in comparison to other canonical texts of the classical darshan, and specifically why the bhavas have been overlooked? What do you think?
Okay, so this is again, a very telling moment when we were with B.K. Natilal and Karl Potter, and we were, I think it was in Ohio at the Vedanta conference, and I was so let down by B.K. Natilal's presentation. And then I said to Karl Potter, I was too timid to talk to B.K. Natilal because he was the Indian professor of logic. But I talked to Karl Potter and I said, we did the Encyclopedia of Indian Philosophies, and I said, why do the materials constantly revert to categories acceptable to Western philosophers? And it was sort of sad that he said, well, the only way that anybody will ever get a job and maintain a job is to be able to be an interlocutor with those people on their own terms. And that he professionally, many, many years ago, made a decision to take that whole apavarga and take that whole mukta thing and just ignore it. And similarly, what we see in Radhakrishnan. And for years and years, I taught from the source book of Indian philosophy. And I remember when it was assigned to me as an undergraduate, and it had already been in circulation, it came out of University of Hawaii. Our professor, who had trained in Pune, who had trained in Gujarat, and in Gujarat Vidyapith, and he said, you can read the text, but do not read Radhakrishnan's prefaces. And when I was in University of Madras couple years ago in his office, and his picture is looming, and I'm feeling, oh, I'm in the presence of the vestiges of greatness. But it really brought me back to the remembrance of when I had to do the same thing, which was to teach against, and then with my knowledge of Sanskrit, it wasn't just that I was teaching against Radhakrishna's prefatory material, which gives a #1 priority to reducing Indian philosophy to the categories of the history of Western philosophy, but I was also teaching against the translations of the Sāṃkhya Kārikā, where spirit and matter, okay? It just was sort of crazy making and reinforcing so many of the dichotomies and dualisms that echo back, and I keep on telling anyone who will stand to listen to me for the umpteenth time, is that no, Sāṃkhya, you cannot, it may be there may be two things in it, but you may not call Sāṃkhya a dualism, because dualism has a history that goes back to Zoroaster with good versus evil, and it has a history that goes more recently back to Descartes, which is mind versus body, and don't call it a dualism. Okay? The number 3 appears again and again. So that's why it's important for the work that we're doing to continue to be done, the linguistic work and the translation work and the retrieval, as you did with Ortega and Anna did with Irigaray, that we create a hermeneutic that's more appropriate to our experience of the text, and to, going back to the word experience, to trust our experience.
Nice follow-up to
Yeah.
your translation of bhava and linga. I like it, but my main concern is this: how do we avoid psychologizing Sāṃkhya metaphysics? I think there is a psychology in it, but it's not reducible to a psychology. It's not a cosmology either.
Right.
How do you avoid psychologizing?
Yeah. It's a choice, just given my teenage years reading Psychology Today, being really influenced by Esalen from afar, being really influenced by both my undergraduate studies and my graduate studies, where we had sustained curriculum in spiritual psychology, to not be afraid to bring out its psychological aspects, with the understanding that it's a different psychology from a, quote, normative psychology, and that there's a soteriology to this psychology that remains distinct from, the Freudian project is getting normal, or even the Jungian project of getting godlike. This is neither down here nor radically up here. So yeah, I don't want to shy too much away from it, because I think those categories are about states of mind and qualities of mind, and that's about the psyche in the traditional Greek sense. Yeah, Morgan.
Yeah. Let's go back to Paul Joyce's work.
Yeah.
You can have two elements that are epistemologically contrastable with each other, and you don't have to have any explicit or implicit conflict.
Right.
Or you can have I think it's very easy to have in Indian philosophy, if I may call it that, a kind of amorality, a non-judgmental morality. So you can contrast two terms the way Joycean does in his works, and that might help in terms of, because there's been this representation of Sāṃkhya as a dualistic.
Yeah, and this is where I think the key word in response to that is one of the descriptors for Purusha, which is madhyastha, standing in the middle.